We begin with breaking news tonight, and Boris Johnson says he will campaign for Britain to leave the EU. He says that going against the Prime Minister is the last thing he wants to do, but that leaving Europe offered a better deal for the people of Britain. 7 of David Cameron's cabinet ministers have now declared that they'll be campaigning for Brexit ahead of the EU referendum in June. So here's what Boris Johnson told reporters gathered outside his home in North London, and a warning that these images do contain flash photography.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. I thought I'd better come out and say something because I could see that you were all in a great mass here, and I apologise for being slow with coming down. You know, you want to ask my views on Europe, don't you? Let me tell you where I've got to, which is that I've made up my mind, and I want to stress, because I can see that we got lots of people here. We've got a huge crowd here. I want to stress that this is not about whether you love Europe or not. I love Brussels. I used to live in Brussels. Fantastic city, wonderful place. And I love European culture and civilization. I consider it to be the greatest civilization this planet has ever produced. And we are all products, or most of us here are products of that civilization. And it is a fantastic thing. But there should be no confusion between the wonders of Europe and holidays in Europe and fantastic food and friendships and whatever else you get from Europe with a political project that is basically going on now for decades, which Britain has been a member of since 1975, and I now think is in real danger of getting out of proper democratic control. That is my view, and it's a view I've held for a long time. I've written a huge number of articles about it. And when people talk about sovereignty, this is not something that is possessed by politicians. Sovereignty is people's ability, the ability of the public to control their lives and to make sure that the people they elect are able to pass the laws that matter to them. And the trouble is with Europe that is being very greatly eroded, and you're seeing it more and more over employment, over border controls, over human rights, over all sorts of stuff. And you've got a supreme judicial body in the European Court of Justice that projects down on this entire 500 million people territory a single unified judicial order from which there is absolutely no recourse and no comebacks. And in my view, that has been getting out of control. There's too much judicial activism, there's too much legislation coming from the EU. And so I look at what the Prime Minister achieved the other day, and I have to say, I think given the time he had, he did fantastically well. I think everybody should pay tribute to David Cameron for what he pulled off in a very short space of time. But I don't think anybody could realistically claim that this is fundamental reform of the EU or of Britain's relationships with the EU. And it's my view that after 30 years of writing about this, we have a chance actually to do something. I have a chance actually to do something. I would like to see a new relationship based more on trade, on cooperation, but as I say, with much less of this supranational element. So that's where I'm coming from, and that's why I've decided, after a huge amount of heartache, because I did not want to do anything. The last thing I wanted was to go against David Cameron or the government. But after a great deal of heartache, I don't think there's anything else I can do. I will be advocating vote leave, or whatever the team is called. I understand there are many of them. I think that is basically because I want a better deal for the people of this country, to save them money and to take back control. That's really, I think, what this is all about. What I won't do, I just stress, what I won't do is take part in loads of blooming TV debates against other members of my party. And I was told about what the Prime Minister had to say this morning about not sharing platforms with George Galloway and other individuals. I won't do that either. I will, if I'm asked my views, and you've been kind enough to come in considerable numbers to ask my views, I will give my views, but that's what they are.
Boris, if that's really what you've thought all along, why have you kept your party waiting for such a long time?
Because the truth is that it has been agonisingly difficult, and I think for many of us, what I said over many years, well, a couple of years now, is I would like to be in a reformed EU, and that's my hope, and an EU that's based more on free trade and fundamental treaty change. I don't think that has really been offered, and so that's where I am.
Isn't this a calculated, cynical play for the leadership of the Conservative Party?
On the contrary, I think that really and truly it would be the best thing possible for the people who are listening to this debate, who are wondering genuinely in their minds which way to go. And I think a lot of people are undecided about this. It's so important if we focus on the question at hand. Is it better for Britain to remain in Europe as it currently is, or is there a way that we could actually get a better deal that did more for British democracy, restored some control to the people of this country? That's the crucial thing for me.
Massive
But it does really look like this is about your leadership.
Excuse me.
Sorry, Robert Pesson. Yeah.
Boris,
look, you've had to go, Laura.
Quite close colleagues of yours do say that they see it as your pitch to be Tory leader.
No,
reassure them that's not the case.
It's not, and I want to make one thing another thing clear. Whatever happens at the end of this, and I've said this to the Prime Minister, he's got to stay. And look, the big battalions of the argument are unquestionably ranged against people like me. We are portrayed as crazy cranks and all the rest of it. I don't mind. I happen to think that I'm right. It's a very, very difficult case to make. I've thought an awful lot about it. I've thought about it for many, many years, and I don't see how, having worried about this issue for quite so long, and having fulminated for quite so long about the lack of democracy in the EU, I can then pass up what I think will be the only chance any of us have in our lifetimes to put an alternative point of view. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So that was Boris Johnson in the last hour or so. Well, our political editor Faisal Islam is still outside Boris Johnson's home there in North London. So, Faisal, just how significant is Boris's decision? How much of a boost will this be for the Leave campaign?
Well, it won't decide the referendum results, but I think it levels the playing field. At one point yesterday, even given the 6 cabinet ministers that walked out the back of Downing Street straight to the Vote Leave HQ, you still had the sense that all the main political parties, President Obama, all the leaders of the European Union and the bulk of the cabinet, including the Prime Minister and others, were backing the decision to stay in the European Union, and it wasn't the stellar cast of cabinet ministers that were going to go for leaving. But now you have Boris Johnson, the most popular politician in the UK, and the leading intellectual force in the Conservative Party, Michael Gove. That is quite something, and I think it probably levels things up. Now we can start the debate. If people felt naturally that the political rules of gravity would mean that the status quo was going to win and Remain was going to win, even if it would seem close at some point, now I think it's far closer, but it is all now wrapped up into the Conservative potential leadership campaign.
And he talked about the decision being agonisingly difficult. His critics suggest that this decision is all about Boris's own ambitions as much as what he wants for Europe. So what could this mean for him politically?
Well, that was the question I put directly to Mr Johnson, and there are many MPs who don't think that Mr Johnson is what you call an outer. That's a long history in the Conservative backbenches, and he hasn't expressed those views. He's expressed contrary views. Actually, in the past, he's suggested that leaving the EU would mean Britain facing some penalties. He said the chance of us leaving the EU is vanishingly small. That said, he's also been very interested for a long time in the problems in the European Union, the inefficiencies of the European Union, the lack of sovereignty. He issued a report a year and a half ago about the reforms he would think were sensible for the EU, and they're far more wide-ranging, covering agricultural policy, fishing policy, justice and home affairs. He even pretended to go through a renegotiation with him playing the role of Prime Minister and myself playing the role of Angela Merkel. But whatever he said about David Cameron's negotiation being fantastic, he clearly doesn't believe that what's come out of that is enough, and tensions undoubted between the Mayor of London's office and Number 10. Number 10 only actually fully confirmed David Cameron personally informed via text message 9 minutes before he came out onto this pavement and told TV audiences exactly where he stood, though his side do point out that an email was sent early on Saturday indicating the direction of travel, to which no reply was given. So yes, a big moment for the referendum, also a big moment for the Conservative Party. OK, Faisal, thank you. Well, this is what we now know about which way senior ministers will campaign in the referendum. Boris Johnson joins the out campaigners Michael Gove, Ian Duncan-Smith, Chris Grayling, Theresa Villiers, Priti Patel and John Whittingdale. Backing the in campaign, the rest of the cabinet, including Theresa May, Michael Fallon, Sajid Javid, Jeremy Wright and Justine Greening, who've all declared their positions following yesterday's cabinet meeting. Well, let's go live now to Downing Street and our chief political correspondent, John Craig. So Boris adds his name to those ministers campaigning for out. How will David Cameron react?
Well, we're told he's pretty furious. He was already furious even before 5 o'clock. That email that Faisal mentioned, according to the political editor of the Daily Telegraph, and remember, we'll read about this in Boris Johnson's column tomorrow in that paper, the email was sent Saturday morning, no reply. The Sunday Times, for whom Mr Cameron gave an interview today, says that he's furious. Mr Cameron apparently has said privately, I can't understand why Boris, as leader of the great financial capital, won't support the city. Well, Mr Cameron's predecessor, Gordon Brown, was renowned for throwing mobile phones at the wall when he was angry. That's not really Mr Cameron's style, but I think we can assume he is pretty angry. If he did indeed get an email yesterday confirming that Boris Johnson was going to do this, and remember he saw him here on Wednesday for 40 minutes, that explains really why there was a rather weary tone in the Prime Minister's television interview this morning in the bit when he talked about, I hope, does Boris really want to go link arms with Nigel Farage and George Galloway, who of course spoke together at a rally on Friday evening. Now, in terms of the personalities of the cabinet, Mr Cameron will feel, and his allies will feel, that Boris Johnson has stabbed him in the back. There's one other senior politician we ought to mention here. There's a battle going on tonight between the Remain and the Leave campaigns about how many Tory backbenchers are backing them. Earlier today, Leave was saying they hope to have a majority. That has tonight been disputed by the Remain campaign. A lot of those Tory MPs who are backing Leave, and indeed will be delighted by Boris Johnson backing Leave, are Johnson supporters who want Boris Johnson and not George Osborne, the resident of number 11 Downing Street, to succeed David Cameron as Prime Minister. So the other person who will be pretty bruised tonight, along with Mr Cameron, is George Osborne, who of course is firmly in the Remain camp as well.
John, thank you. We're just going to take you back to our political editor, Faisal Islam. We spoke to him a few moments ago, as you know. He's outside Boris Johnson's house. Faisal, you have a line for us. Tell us what you can. Tell us what you can. What's the latest?
Already, other big beasts are now being deployed to attack Boris Johnson's position. Lord Heseltine has issued a statement saying that given that Boris has spent so long agonising over this decision, his decision is illogical. It takes you this long to make up your mind about something so fundamental and you still have questions, then surely the right option is to stay with what you know rather than risk our economy and security with, that phrase, a leap into the dark. If he were to be successful in his ambition to cut us off from Europe, the flags would fly in Frankfurt and Paris in his honour. At a stroke, he'd have blown away the safeguards for our financial services industry that the Prime Minister has just secured. That is to risk countless jobs across our country, from Edinburgh in the north to Bournemouth in the south, and of course London itself. Lord Heseltine, a big beast, obviously well-known pro-EU views, coming out to counteract and to criticise Boris Johnson's decision to back leaving the EU.
OK, Faisal, thank you. Well, let's get more reaction now. David Cameron is said to be privately furious with Boris Johnson's decision to back Brexit, saying he can't understand why the Mayor of London, of this great financial capital, as he put it, won't support the city. Well, to help shed some light on the London Mayor's thinking, I'm joined now by Conservative MP and Justice Minister Dominic Raab, who's campaigning for Britain to leave the EU. Welcome to you. What's your reaction to Boris Johnson joining the Leave campaign? Just how pleased are you?
Well, look, I don't think any one individual is going to clinch this debate, but Boris brings really a key Heineken effect, if you like. He reaches people and parts of this debate that other conventional politicians can't. And he does it for two reasons. And we saw it with the interview he gave on the steps under quite a bit of pressure with the media scrum. He distilled down what's a very complicated issue to two things. One, he wants to save British people money, and two, he wants to give them back their powers. And that's going to be important, communicators who can distill this down into the bread and butter. The second aspect of this, which I think is important, is we're already seeing him being criticised having sat on the fence. Let's remember, this debate is going to be won with people who are currently sat on the fence. I think Boris Johnson understands. He talked about being agonised, he talked about being torn. I think he understands that this is actually a very difficult issue. And so he probably empathises a lot more with those swing voters on this issue than those who have got very entrenched views.
Well, yes, you're referring there to Lord Heseltine, as we've just heard, calling it illogical for him to have taken so long to come to this decision. But if he is so conflicted, and if it is such a tight call, can he really campaign with any real passion and conviction?
Yes, I think he can. I think Boris is he's a natural winner. That's the other thing about him. He's won in London, which is regarded as Labour's stronghold, twice running. But he makes a virtue of being pragmatic, considered, regarded as this sort of colourful character, but also very serious with it. And the truth is, it is going to be distilling down for those people who are torn what the issues are that is going to matter. The ideologues in this debate, frankly, who have already made up their mind, speak to those who have already made up their mind amongst the voters. It's the swing voters that will count.
But how big a role can he play in the Leave campaign? He's talked about not sharing a platform with other people in the campaign, saying that he'll give his view if asked, but he's not going to actively be out there debating with the Prime Minister, is he?
Well, let's see what happens. I mean, I don't know how many debates the Prime Minister will do either. I don't know quite how this will pan out. It's we've only just had the news. But I think the thing to remember is that whatever form it takes, he's got a very strong communication style and skill, and it reaches people that the elite, the conventional politicians, cannot. And that is going to be the key, because this debate and this political battle and this EU referendum is going to be about those people who haven't yet fully made up their mind.
What do you say to those people who suggest that this is more about Boris Johnson's own personal political ambitions than about how he feels about Europe?
Well, look, I think we should debate the substance of this. We're going to have the Westminster Village pantomime, and I hope we then move on quite quickly to debate the substance. I take the Ronald Reagan view, the Ronald Reagan 11th commandment, never talk ill of your fellow Conservatives. So I'm not going to respond to all that and get into the personalised stuff. And I'm certainly not going to be a psychologist as to what's going through Boris Johnson's mind. But the fact of the matter is, none of that will matter anyway. It is the fact that you now have a broad-based team backing out, which is going to be, I think, one of its strengths.
But it does pit Boris Johnson against the Prime Minister. You're pitted against your leader as well. How uncomfortable a position does that feel? Do you worry about the party splitting apart?
Well, I certainly don't like doing anything against David Cameron or in conflict or tension with him, because I think he's a fantastic Prime Minister. I support him, and of course he's given us this referendum, and he's also given ministers this freedom. But when push comes to shove, country first. And my conviction is that the best thing for Britain is to restore some of its freedoms economically, to create more jobs, to have a better quality of life for the people in this country, and also to make sure we don't see the breakdown in the democratic contract, which I think the EU is bringing about. And so, as difficult as it is, for me the most important thing is to be true to my convictions and do the right thing for the country.
How did David Cameron react when you told him that you were going to campaign for out?
Well, we had a conversation last week, and I was just very honest about it. And actually, I have to say, he was incredibly magnanimous about it. And I repeated some of the things I've said to you, but I'm not going to go into the whole detail of it. But I think this should be respectful. I don't think it should be personalised. And we've, I think, on both sides, got to have, and I certainly have, one eye on the fact that after the people have decided, the British people have given their verdict, we get back to the business of 100% focused on delivering and defeating Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party at the next election. And I think that's likely to happen. I don't think there's going to be this great fragmentation that some people suggest.
OK, Dominic Raab, thanks very much indeed for coming in. Good to talk to you. Thank you. You're watching Sky News. Coming up.